So welcome, first of all. And also, if you're watching this, I do want to thank you. And it means a lot to know that I have something worthwhile to share with you. And, if you feel like commenting, I always appreciate that. If you like it, that's also nice. If you do, if you don't, you shouldn't say anything. But at any rate, I was just thinking of how much I really appreciate the fact that I feel I can make a little bit of a contribution. Well, we're going to get into the screen share and I'll make the bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Thank you. And we are in Leviticus. That's the book we are starting this coming Shabbat. And of course, we've spent a couple of years studying it. And guess what? We're on Leviticus chapter 2. And it turns out that we are reading, as you will see, we are reading about menachot, about meal offerings. That's what a mincha is. And here we're talking about a specific mincha. And we're going to read about it. Let's just read about it and see what we're talking about. Ve'im takriv minchat bikurim, right? And should you offer up a meal offering of your first ripening fruits? Exactly what this is going to mean, we're going to find out. Hashem to Hashem. If you offer this up, what should it be? Aviv kalui. So aviv is new grain, kalui ba'esh, parched in the fire. Geris carmel. Geris are grits, in other words, with the grain broken into pieces. Carmel of tender barley. These are references to the Jastrow dictionary where I looked up these words, takriv, you shall offer up, et minchat, your meal offering, bikurecha, of your first fruits. So just having that would not give us how the tradition understands what this is referring to. What exactly is a minchat bikurim? What is this meal offering of your first fruits? So let's take a look here. So the im takriv. So, and it says, so it starts off with, and if you should offer up. And Rashi has to jump on that word if here, that translating the word im, if, sounds like it's conditional, right? You want to do it, fine. You don't want to do it, fine. And he says, hare im, he says, this case of the use of the word im, meshamesh belashon ki. It actually means when. It doesn't mean if in the sense of, you can do it, you don't want to do it. It means it's not conditional. If it's conditional, it means when you get to this, if you get to this point in the summer or in the spring, etc., when it's time to do this. And it's also saying, and if there's an if, it's saying, would you, when it's time for you to offer up this particular kind of offering. So let me go on a little bit, and then I want to, we'll get to the point here. Ki b'lashon ki. Sharei ein ze reshut. He says, this is not a matter of, reshut, permission, meaning if you want to do it, you're allowed to do it. That's not what it's saying. Sharei b'minchat ha'omer hakatuv medaber. Because in fact, the context of this mitzvah, this statement, is the meal offering of the Omer offering, right? So the Omer is a measure of grain, a specific measure of grain. And to tell you about Omer, some of you have heard that term because you've heard of Lag BaOmer, right? The 33rd day of the counting of the Omer. But here we're talking about the actual offering of the mincha, of this meal offering that was done according to tradition, the day after Pesach, the first day of Pesach. So the first day of Pesach is the 15th of Nisan, and the Omer was brought on the 16th of Nisan. For those of you who don't know, this was actually the subject of a huge, huge debate because of the way the Torah tells you when to bring this, okay? And I won't go into that now, but the issue that you should know is that, of course, this was happening in the springtime when the fields are starting to ripen fresh grain and fresh fruits, etc. And there was a law that you could not eat of the new grain, right, of the grain of the new season that was grown in that season until the Omer was brought. That's a very important practical element going on here. That was the time when you could start to eat and consume the new grain, the new harvest. And you'll see that the mincha of the Omer was of barley. And the reason why it was barley is because barley is one of the first grains to ripen in the spring. And the lesson behind all of this, the spiritual lesson, is that this is one of those commandments that try to help us understand that we don't own these things, that in fact we are subject to our great creator, our great sovereign Hashem, who makes all these things possible. And following this commandment is one of those by saying, well, you can't just go help yourself to whatever you like. You don't own the land. You don't own the earth. But to have a sense, a certain level of humility and modesty, and saying, this is the way in which we acknowledge that to God is the earth and all that it contains. And putting feet to it, not just to have a concept of it, but to bring it into our lives, to actually clothe it with the behavior of how it influences us. And this is actually a profound element within the tradition, that this whole idea of mitzvot, of commandments, of living according to commandments, is a way in which you bring God into your life. And that when we use this term Eloheinu, our God, that one word brings along with it this concept of following commandments and not just living lives the way we want to, which would make ourselves Elohim, right? That would be making gods of ourselves. But to have an Elohim means that we have one that is above us and beyond us, whom we show our respect and our love in this particular kind of way. So this word Elohim and Eloheinu specifically does take into account all this kind of idea of how you live your life and how you gain some significance in the life you're living. So going on, excuse me, please. the Rashi goes on. Shehi chova. It's an obligation, right? That's what this is talking about. It's not an if you want to do it. It's not saying, well, you can do it if you like. It's saying you must do it. When? V'chein ve'im yeha yovel. And Rashi gives another example of this use of the word im when it says, and if the Jubilee year approaches, right? If there is a Jubilee year. Well, what do you mean if there's a Jubilee year? The Jubilee year always occurs the 50th year. It's not if. It's saying when. When. Minchat bikurim, right? A meal offering of first fruits. Beminchat haomer hakatuv medaber. So once again, he says, we're talking about that meal offering of the Omer. Shehi ba'a aviv, because it comes at the early ripening time. B'sha'at bishul hatfu'ah, when the produce ripens, at the time of the ripening of the produce, we're here referring to the grain. Umin hasorim iba. So here we go. And it's made up of barley. Saorim are barley. Ne'emar kan aviv. So how do we know this? We derive it from the fact that it says here it mentions aviv, Ne'emar lahalan, and back there earlier on in Exodus when there's hail, I believe. right? And as one of the plagues, and the hail destroys the barley. Ki hasaora aviv. There it is. It says right there, it links barley to the word aviv, right? Meaning that the barley is early ripening. So when it talks about aviv here, right, we know that they're talking about the very first ripening grain, because it's a mincha offering, it's a meal offering. So kalui be'esh, what do we mean by that? So we're talking about parched or roasted in fire, shemiyavshin oto, that what we do is we dry out that grain, right, that's found in those sheaves of barley, al ha'ur, with fire. It's dried out, parched with fire, but avuv shel klayot, and or ibuv, something like that, shel klayot, meaning the tube of klayot means the people who parch grain. So they had a special tube where they put the barley in, or the grain, to parch it and on fire. And in fact, in the Mishnah, the book on the oral Torah, it describes this tube and how it had holes in it so that the fire could reach the grain. Pire, here we go. Piresh Rashi b'menachot sham. There we go. So it says, Rashi explains in the tractate Menachot, it's a name of a tractate, meal offerings, Hakli shel mochrei klayot, that he explains that there it is, the vessel, right, or the utensil, shel mochrei klayot, of people who sell parched grain. Going on. Ilule, right? Because were you not to parch the grain, if you were not to dry it out like that, eina nitchenet berechayim, you wouldn't be able to grind it in the mill, lefi shehi lecha, because it's too moist, and so it doesn't work in a mill. The mill isn't going to grind it up into these parched pieces. Geris Carmel, right? So meaning here he explains Geris Carmel. These are not common words. He says Grusa be'oda lecha, right? So it's broken, it's turned into grits while it is still moist. Well, of course, we've just said it's not, but here the point is that it's harvested, and when it's harvested, it hasn't dried out yet in the sheath. And that's what I believe he means. In other words, you take it, you parch it, and then you break it into pieces, into the grits. Geris Lashon Shvira. He says the word geris has the meaning of broken. Utechina, right? And ground. Gorsa berechaim. He grinds it up in a mill, shel grusot. In other words, a grist mill. Kamo, and now he gives other examples where this root garas, right, is found to mean broken, right? By gares, the chatzatz, it means broken by gravel. This is a whole different context, okay? Vechein garsa nafshi. In one of the Psalms, it talks about how my soul is garsa, how my soul is broken up. In other words, how sad I am, how I'm in a place of deep sadness. Carmel, again, all these unusual words that need to be explained. Carmel, but od hakar, so he says, so this, he's taking this word kar, he says, while the husk of the grain, right, malay, is filled. In other words, that's when you have to harvest it. So the grain is still in the husk. Shehatvu'a lecha, because the produce, lach means moist, but possibly he means fresh, right? Really fresh, that the produce is fresh, umle'a, and full, bakashin, in the stalks. Shela, in its stalks. V'alkein nikraim hamelilot, and for this reason, those ripe ears are called carmel. They're referred to as carmel to describe their actual state. V'chein carmel v'tziklono. And I'm not sure what this is a reference to. I'm not familiar with this phrase and whether he's quoting something, because it does sound like that, right? So in other words, ripe in its husk. Going on. Let's go on with the mitzvah as the Torah describes this mitzvah of the Omer, of bringing the Omer. V'natata aleha shemen, and once you've done that, you shall put oil on it. V'samta aleha levuna, and in addition, you shall then place upon it frankincense, mincha hi. It is a meal offering. And of course, we know with most meal offerings, right, they involve oil and frankincense. Vehiktir hakohen et azkarata, and the priest shall turn into smoke, right? It's remembrance, literally, is what it means. So just to refresh your memory, the meal offering generally wasn't put entirely on the altar. It wasn't burnt in its entirety. What happened was the priest would take a pinch of that, of the grain of the meal offering, and all of its frankincense, and then put that on the altar and cause it to smoke. Mi girsha u mishmana, in other words, take its remembrance, that remembrance part, its azkara, from the grits, right, from the grain itself, u mishamna, and from its oil, al kol levanata. There we go, as I said, over all its, with all its frankincense. Isher Lashem. It is a fire offering to Hashem. And it's interesting, the whole idea of mincha offerings, of meal offerings, and the fact that the tradition compares them to an animal offering, that just as part of the animal, generally, it was a fat part of the animal that would go up on the altar. Likewise, the mincha, when it comes to the mincha, just part of it goes onto it, and then part of it would be eaten by the priests, and to give it a sense. Remember, this is probably an offering that even poor people can afford, as opposed to an animal, and yet it has the sanctity and the fact that it has the value, just as if one were bringing an animal. So there's a wonderful statement that Rashi quotes from the tradition, which is whether a person does a lot or a little, in other words, the amount of stuff you do, what really is important is yekavein libo lashamayim. He should turn his heart towards heaven. He should direct his heart towards heaven. So that's it with mincha offerings. And now with chapter 3, we begin another kind of offering. And excuse me, basically, as the book of Leviticus begins, it is talking about personal offerings. There's a distinction to be made between personal offerings, where an individual might bring an offering themselves to express a situation that they want to express, although the offering of the mincha that we just mentioned is obviously a public offering, and then public offerings, which were brought on behalf of the entire community. And of course, that Omer offering is a public offering. It's brought on behalf of the community. So here we go. The im zevach shlamim. So now we're talking about shlamim. Shlamim. Sometimes they're called peace offerings. And if a offering or sacrifice of peace offerings, korbano is his offering, his sacrifice. So again, korbano, his, meaning, of course, that it's an individual. So what kind of animal? This is now following a pattern that we've seen before in the book of Leviticus in the previous chapters. Im min habakar hu makriv. If he brings an offering from cattle, or im zachar im nekeva, whether it is male or female. So this is interesting, and it's a distinction, because with other offerings, it has to either be male or it has to be female. But when it came to peace offerings, shlamim, maybe I should just refer to them as shlamim, it can be either male or female. But what it does need to be is tamim. It needs to be perfect, unblemished. Yakrivenu, he should offer it up, bifnei Hashem, before Hashem, before the Lord. So, let's see. Let's go back and take a look and see what Rashi has to say about this. So, shlamim, he tries to analyze this term for this offering and why this particular offering is referred to as shlamim. Shemashtilim shalom ba'olam. Why? Because they bring about peace into the world. That the idea of this offering is to focus and to bring peace into the world. Davar acher, another interpretation. Shlamim, why are they called shlamim? Sheyesh bahem shilum, because through them there is payment lamizbeach, for the altar, v'la kohanim, and for the priests, ula va'alim, and to the owners of the offering, the people who brought the offering. And it's interesting that lishalem, right, means to pay. And that's the idea of it, of the fairness involved, that should be involved in compensating, right? There's that idea. We even use that term compensation, which has more than one meaning to it or one context to it. So likewise, this word shlamim, that things are made whole, and that the idea of this particular offering, because in other offerings, the olah, all right, essentially all of it was burnt. Some of it was burnt on the altar, some of it was burnt outside the camp, and only the skin of the offering was given to the priests by way of paying them for bringing the sacrifice, for their work, but just the skin. And when it came to chatot, when it came to sin offerings, which we have dealt with, right, then part of it went up on the altar, part of it went to the priest, and part of it was burnt off. And only with shlamim did the owners also partake, the owner and his family, or her family. Basically, it would have been his family back then. So the samach yados, so we're going into the detail of the process of doing it. He should put his hand al rosh korvano, on the head of his offering. So samach actually would mean to, in a way, support his hand. So there was actually this smicha, this laying of the hands, was done where the person put their weight on the head of the animal, and symbolically, as we may have mentioned already, the idea that the animal is actually coming to take the place of the individual themselves, that giving yourself as a gift is the greatest gift that you can give anyone. And so this came to be understood as tantamount to offering yourself up. That was the understanding. Ushechato, and they shall slaughter the animal, petach ohel moed, at the entrance of the tent of meeting. V'zarku bnei Aaron hakohanim, and the sons of Aaron, the priests, shall throw, right, cast et hadam, the blood of the animal, al hamizbeach saviv, all around the altar. So I'm thinking at this point, I will stop and let you make any comments that you'd like to make. If you have any questions or any reflections that you'd like to share on this particular lesson here. So I'll stop the share and just mention, of course, that the book of Leviticus, in a way, follows so naturally the end of the book of Exodus, because what happened at the end of the book of Exodus was the construction of the tabernacle. We went into huge detail into the construction of the Mishkan. And in the book of Leviticus, we read about how they used this Mishkan, how it actually operated, and for what purpose they did. So before I stop the recording, any comments, any thoughts, any reflections? Okay, all right.